Hi, my name is Sarah Moran. My pen name is SG Moran, and I've embarked on a journey to read through all 51 volumes of the Harvard Classics collection. I'm currently on volume 4, which is all about Milton. In a few of my last videos, I talked about some of Milton's poems that are included in volume 4, and then, of course, Paradise Lost, which I believe Milton is best known for. And in this video, I get to talk about the sequel to Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained. And when I started reading Milton through the Harvard Classics collection, I had always wanted to read Paradise Lost, but I had never really known that Paradise Regained was a thing. I feel like I had probably heard of it, but I didn't know that it was by Milton, that it was an actual continuation of Paradise Lost and not just like someone else's view on Paradise Lost. And so discovering it in the Harvard Classics collection, having it included here so that it's easy for me to access, easy to read, has been fantastic. And it was really cool to be able to read it directly after finishing Paradise Lost, because normally I probably would take a break and come back to an author later, especially in the case of a short story novella type thing like Paradise Regained is. But because it was combined in one volume of Harvard Classics, I read it back to back, and it was a really great experience to do that, and I would highly recommend it to anybody thinking about reading Paradise Lost, to read Paradise Regained directly afterwards, because it is a continuation of that story. And it's really nice to be able to get the full picture that Milton was creating. And so I've really enjoyed Milton. I've enjoyed his collection in the Harvard Classics. And I am looking forward to reading the last Milton in the Harvard Classics Volume 4, which is Samson Agonistes, which is about Samson. And so I'm really looking forward to that one. But Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained have been fantastic reads. So I talked a little bit about Milton in my last videos, but a brief refresher is that Milton was born in London in 1608. He went to Cambridge. He was originally going to be a minister, member of the clergy, but because of some issues going on in the church in that time period, he decided to turn to a poetic type career instead. He traveled the world a little bit to further his education, especially in that field of poems and prose. And he was very involved in his government at the time. There was a civil war that kind of happened, and for a while the monarchy was overthrown, if I understand it correctly, and Milton was a part of that. But then when Charles II was restored to power, Milton kind of had to go into retirement because the political atmosphere shifted and he needed to kind of get below the radar of those in power. He also went into retirement partially because he worked to the point where he went blind. He already had poor eyesight, and he was a very hard worker, and he worked himself to exhaustion to the point where he lost his eyesight completely. And when that happened is when we get Paradise Lost, which is amazing to think that the book that he's most well known for, the story that's stuck around in common culture for so long. I mean, all of Milton's other stuff, for the most part, is still accessible, especially through collections like this, but it's not as easily accessible for the public. It's not as prevalent as a classic like Paradise Lost still is today. And we got that wonderful classic from Milton after he had lost his eyesight, which just is an amazing thing. And then Milton died in 1674. So Paradise Regained brings us to the end of the Paradise Lost saga of sorts. It brings us to the end of the story. And where Paradise Lost talks about Adam and Eve falling, the fall of man, and the corruption from Satan, who has himself fallen and then gone into the world to cause deceit and to drive mankind away from God. Paradise Lost focuses on that, but Paradise Regained talks about the temptation of Jesus when he's right after he was baptized, and he goes out into the wilderness and is wandering for 40 days and fasting, and at the beginning of his ministry. And so Paradise Lost talks about that temptation. And so we get all these parallels between the fall of Adam and Eve and then the temptation of Jesus at the beginning of his ministry. And you get that all mankind was doomed because of one man, and all of mankind is saved because of God in the form of another man, Jesus. And so it really makes sense that this would be the ending of the story, the conclusion to the fall. And when I went into Paradise Regained, I had no idea what exactly it was going to be talking about. I was like, it's going to have something to do with like mankind being redeemed in a way. But I didn't know what exact area of the like New Testament realm it would focus on. And so I wasn't really expecting it to be, I was expecting it to be like Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. But as I was reading it, and I get to read about Jesus's temptation in the wilderness, I realized that this was such a more key section to look at in parallel to the fall of Adam and Eve. And so we get Satan trying once again to lead mankind astray, to get the Son of God to fall, and Satan looks at the Son of Man, and he's like, the Son of God, and he's like, this guy, this is the one that we were told would come and crush the serpent's head. This was the one that was promised to Eve from her descendants. And so Satan's like, oh, I'm a little worried now. And so he goes and he tries to tempt Jesus and cause him to stumble and him to fall so that he can prevent this crushing of the serpent's head, him being defeated by Jesus. Of course, this does not work. And so it's a really interesting way of looking at it. And personally, reading that story in the Bible, I had never really seen the parallels as much between the fall of Adam and Eve and that temptation of Jesus in the wilderness, is that he's facing the same type of temptation that they were facing. And the interesting thing about Paradise Lost, that Milton kind of explores this idea of the snake telling Eve that he ate from the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and he ascended to the next level of being like mankind. And he tells Eve that if she eats of the fruit, she will ascend to the next level and be like God. And so when Satan tries to tempt Jesus in Paradise Regained, he's telling him, look at all of this world before you. I can make you king of this all if you bow down to me. And he's kind of using some of the same tactics between the two instances. So Milton does a very good job of writing this and exploring the theme further in Paradise Regained and bringing it to its logical conclusion. And it was a great book. I really enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed Paradise Regained quite a bit more than Paradise Lost, both for its brevity, its ease of being read and understood, and just the topic matter. It's uplifting, it's encouraging, and it is a good reminder that while the fall happened and we are fallen humans and we're subject to the sins of this world, we have hope. And that's something that I really enjoyed reading and that I think Milton did a great job of conveying. So, without further ado, let's get into some quotes from Paradise Regained. First quote I have is, I, who erewhile the happy garden, sung by one man's disobedience lost, now sing recovered paradise to all mankind, by one man's firm obedience, fully tried through all temptation, and the tempter foiled in all his wiles, defeated and repulsed, and Eden raised in the waste wilderness. So this, just like in Paradise Lost, we get this narrator, this chorus type thing at the very beginning where it's the author talking to the audience, invoking the muse, explaining what the story is going to entail. And so here Milton is like talking directly to the reader and saying this is what's about to happen. He's saying the last story was about man's disobedience and the fall, and that by one man's disobedience everyone was fallen. And now we're going to talk about the man who's going to come to heal that rift and that will defeat sin and death. The next quote is, "For lying is thy sustenance, thy food, yet thou pretendest to truth." And I believe this was Jesus talking to Satan, and it's definitely in addressing Satan here, and that lying is his sustenance. It's what he lives on, but he pretends it to be truth. And that's just such an important thing to remember, is that he thrives on lying and deceit and corruption, pretending all the while that it's truth and justice and for the good of mankind. The next quote is, "God hath now sent his living oracle into the world to teach his final will, and sends his spirit of truth henceforth to dwell in pious hearts, an inward oracle to all truth requisite for men to know." So there's this section where Milton is talking about how there's like the Oracle of Delphi, there's these false, evil oracles that are in the world at this time period. You know, the Greeks and the other people groups and things like that, the pagans that are out there, they have their prophets and their oracles. But God is saying, no longer is that the case. I am sending my spirit, the Holy Spirit, into the hearts of the pious, into the hearts of my followers, so that they will have discernment and they will have understanding and they will know the truth, the true prophecy and what is to come. The next quote is, "But to guide nations in the way of truth, by saving doctrine, and from error lead to know, and knowing, worship God aright, is yet more kingly." This is talking about how it's more kingly to lead people to the truth and to worship of the true God than it is to demonstrate other kingly actions like war and leadership in other areas. And that's why Jesus is the king, is because he's bringing this truth to the world. The next quote is, "He asked thee, hast thou seen my servant Job? Famous he was in heaven, on earth less known, where glory is false glory, attributed to things not glorious, men not worthy of fame." So this, I believe, was Jesus talking to Satan again. And he's saying that earthly glory is false glory. It's not the glory that we obtain when we're in heaven. It's not the glory we should seek after. And that Job, who suffered so much on earth, who was despised and rejected, he was famous in heaven. He was known for his perseverance and his faith during his life, even though on earth he had no glory. He had no respect a lot of the time from those around him. And so Jesus is telling Satan, this worldly glory doesn't mean anything. It's not what people should be striving after. And so when you tempt me with worldly glory, it's not going to tempt me, because I have heavenly glory and fame in heaven, and fame on earth is meaningless. The next quote says, "Yet so much bounty is in God, such grace, that who advance his glory, not their own, them he himself to glory will advance." Those that seek to advance God's glory, those who are spreading the gospel, who are uplifting the name of God, who are seeking to do his will more than their own and not worrying about their own glory and their own power on this world, God will automatically give them more glory in heaven, if not on earth, but he will advance them into greater things, either sometimes on earth, but not always. And even if they don't get that glory, that advancement on earth, they will in heaven. The next quote is, "He who receives light from above, from the fountain of light, no other doctrine needs, though granted true." I think this is very important, especially in present times. I feel like the further along we get, and maybe this isn't the case, maybe it's always been this way, and maybe it's been this way to a more extreme in the past, but doctrine is held on this pedestal. Churchly doctrine, churchly denominations are in many cases put above the Bible itself. And Milton is writing here that those who get their light and their understanding and their knowledge from God, from above, from the Bible, from the words that he has left for us, do not need other doctrine, other worldly opinions about these things. Even if those opinions, even if those doctrines might be very useful and profitable at times, we don't need them because we have understanding from God. And that's something very important to remember, is to never put earthly doctrines above that light from the heavenly fountain of light. The next quote I have here is, "Alas, what can they teach and not mislead? Ignorant of themselves, of God much more, and how the world began, and how man fell, degraded by himself, on grace depending." This is talking about how those who are ignorant of themselves and of God and of the fall and of human history and biblical history should not teach others, and what they do teach is probably not going to be profitable because they're ignorant of so many of the key things. And one of the most key things is that man fell. He is degraded by himself and reliant on grace. And that's something that if that's not being taught, then there's a problem. And if the person who's teaching does not understand that key concept, then everything they teach is going to fall short in a way. The last quote is, "However, many books, wise men have said, are wearisome. Who reads incessantly, and to his reading brings not a spirit and judgment equal or superior, and what he brings, what needs he elsewhere seek. Uncertain and unsettled still remains, deep versed in books and shallow in himself." When people read a lot, and I know this from personal experience sometimes because I read a lot, and they read without understanding and without judgment, then it can be wearisome, it can be tiring, it can be not helpful. And you need to have that wisdom and that understanding and that judgment as you're reading. Otherwise, what you're reading is going to be relatively meaningless. And I just love this part of the quote because I think it's very, it strikes at the heart of something very deep in academia in general and in my own life that I have to remind myself at times. Deep versed in books and shallow in himself. Books are not everything. There needs to be action. There needs to be reliance on God. There needs to be empathy. There needs to be other stuff going on besides just knowledge through books. Knowledge through books is not everything. And oftentimes when you are learning and you're increasing your knowledge, you can get proud, and pride cometh before the fall. And many times it can cause you to be less open towards other views, other opinions. It can make you think that you know more than you do. And that can become a huge problem for yourself and for those around you. And so, books are not everything. As much as I would like to pretend they are sometimes, because it's easy, for me at least, it's easy to pick up a book and read a book and increase my knowledge that way. Doing it through action, through prayer, through growing closer to God is a lot more difficult, and something I don't necessarily like doing as much as picking up a book and being able to read a book. So it definitely is a challenge and a good reminder for me personally to remind myself that books are not everything and knowledge through books is not everything. So, that was the last quote I had from Paradise Regained. Again, really enjoyed this short little book. I think it was maybe like 50 pages. It's very short, short and sweet. And Samson Agonistis is also very short. But I did want to split them up because I feel like they are very separate ideas, separate stories, and they each deserve their own little video talking about them, even if the videos are a little bit shorter than my usual fare. And so, really enjoyed Harvard Classics Volume 4, Paradise Regained. If anybody's read Paradise Regained, please let me know what you think, what you preferred, Paradise Lost or Paradise Regained as a story. If you consider Paradise Regained to be the perfect conclusion to the perfect continuation and conclusion of Paradise Lost, or if you would consider a different aspect of scripture or something outside of scripture to be the perfect ending, continuation of Paradise Lost. Let me know about that. And if you like videos like this, remember to like this video and subscribe for more Harvard Classics and other literature type videos along the way. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.